When you say pursue something meaningful, is it important to have a vocation?
I think it's more important to have an ethos, an ethic. So I have a program, for example, called the Future Authoring Program, which is a writing program that enables people to develop a vision for their life and then to develop a strategy. And so it's based on the idea, imagine that, and it's an extension of the ideas in the book, or at least something along the same lines. The first thing that you want to do is figure out, imagine you were taking care of yourself, like you were someone you cared for, which is rule number 2, by the way, essentially. Then you should figure out, well, if you could have what you needed and wanted, what would it be? What sort of friends would you have? What would your family relationships look like? How would you conduct yourself with your children? How would you educate yourself? You need to think through how it is that your life could be properly arranged if you had that ability. And then you can aim at that. And the funny thing is that if you do posit a goal of that sort and work towards it, you will move towards it. The goal will change because you'll learn things along the way. But I mean, I've dealt with hundreds of people in my clinical and consulting practice, and we set a goal, we develop a vision and work towards it, and things inevitably get better for people. So it's not a luxury, it's difficult. It's a moral responsibility, and it isn't happiness. It's not, the pursuit isn't for happiness.
It's a moral responsibility to pursue what is meaningful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when if you watch yourself, you say, well, I had a particularly good day at work. And what does that mean? Well, it means that you lost your sense of time, right? Because when you're having not a good day at work, it's like, first it's 1 minute to 3, and then it's 45 seconds to 3, and then it's 30 seconds. That's what school was like for me. It was like, click. It's so funny, I went to my daughter's school. I used to get in trouble for talking all the time. Surprise, surprise. When I was a kid, and I was bored stiff in school, and so I would misbehave upon occasion, out of pure boredom. And about 21 years ago, I went to my daughter's school to sit for a class. It was about an hour long, and I was sitting there, and the teacher had all the kids on the floor and was having some of the kids read to the others, and some of the kids who were reading couldn't read at all. And I had exactly the same experience. I was sitting there, it was like being 7 years old again. I could see the clock going tick, tick. And I thought, if I was in this classroom for 3 days, I would misbehave. 40 years old, I would misbehave exactly like I did when I was 6. Well, that's no place to be, right? Because you don't want to be in a place that's stultifying. You don't want to be in a place where there's no challenge. You might even quit your job if there's no challenge. Say, well, that's a good job. It gives you security. And you think, God, I can't stand this. It's eating away at my soul. It's all security and no challenge. So why do you want to challenge? Because that's what you're built for. That's what you're built for. You're built to take on a maximal load, right? Because that's what strengthens you, and you need to be strong because life is extraordinarily difficult, and because the evil king is always whittling away at the structure of the state, and you have to be awake and sharp to stop that from happening so that you don't become corrupt, and so that your family doesn't become corrupt, and so that your state doesn't have to become corrupt. You have to have your eyes open and your wits sharp and your words at the ready, and you have to be educated, and you have to know about your history, and you have to know how to think, and you have to know how to read, and you have to know how to speak, and you have to know how to aim, and you have to be willing to hoist the troubles of the world up on your shoulders. And what's so interesting about that, so remarkable, and this is something that's really manifested itself to me as I've been doing these public lectures. I've been talking about responsibility to people, which doesn't seem to happen very often anymore, and the audiences are dead quiet. And I lay out this idea that life is tragedy tainted by malevolence, and everyone says, yeah, well, we always suspected that, but no one has ever said it quite so bluntly, and it's quite a relief to hear that I'm not the only person who has those suspicions. And then the second part of that is the better part, and it's the optimistic part, which is, despite the fact that life is a tragedy tainted by malevolence, at every level of existence, there's something about the human spirit that can thrive under precisely those conditions if we allow that to occur. Because as difficult as life is, and as horrible as we are, our capacity to deal with that catastrophe and to transcend that malevolent spirit is more powerful than that reality itself. And that's the fundamental issue. I think that's the fundamental issue of the Judeo-Christian ethic, with its emphasis on the divinity of the individual. As catastrophic as life is, and as malevolent as people can be, and that's malevolent beyond belief fundamentally, a person has in spirit the nobility to set that right and to defeat evil. And that more than that, and that the antidote to the catastrophe of life and the suffering of life and the tragedy of life that can drive you down and destroy you is to take on exactly that responsibility and to say, well, there's plenty of work to be done, and isn't that terrible? And there isn't anything so bad that we can't make it worse, and certainly try very hard to do so, but I have it within me to decide that I'm going to stand up against that. I'm going to strive to make the world a better place. I'm going to strive to constrain the malevolence that's in my own heart, and to set my family straight, and to work despite my tragic lot for the betterment of everything that's in front of me. And the consequence of that, the immediate consequence of that, is that when you make the decision to take on all of that voluntarily, which is to stand up straight, by the way, with your shoulders back, to take on all that on voluntarily, as soon as you make that decision, then all the catastrophe justifies itself in the nobility of your striving. And that's what it means to be an individual. Thank you.
When I was 25 or so, I probably weighed about 138 pounds. I smoked like a pack of cigarettes a day. I drank tremendous amount of alcohol. I was from northern Alberta, this rough little town up in northern Alberta called Fairview, and there were long winters there, and my friends were heavy drinkers, and most of them dropped out of school by the time they were 15 or 16, went off to work on the oil rigs, and it was a rough town, and we drank a lot. I started when I was 14, and and so I had a lot of bad habits, let's say, and things that were, and I wasn't in great shape physically, and I was also still intellectually obsessed as I am now, and so that would have been in 85. But I decided around then, about 85, 84, something like that, maybe a little earlier, that I was really going to try to get my act together, and so I started doing that. I first of all I quit smoking. Oh, that took a long time because I eventually had to quit drinking too in order to quit smoking, and I started working out, started playing sports, which I'd never done. I was a small kid. I'd been skipped a grade, and I was a small for my age, so sports were never, especially team sports, were never really a domain of expertise for me. Although I skied and went trapping with my dad, went cross-country skiing and camping and all that. So